Hello, you're listening to Tomorrow Talk. I'm Sabrina Halper, and today I am very excited to have Joshua Browder on the show, who is the CEO and founder of DoNotPay, which is the first robot lawyer that has helped people save over $100 million in parking tickets, subscriptions, and many more services. So I'm very excited to dive into it, Joshua. Thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Sabrina.
Where are you now?
I'm in San Francisco.
Okay, amazing. I am in New York, and it just started thundering and pouring, and it's 100 degrees. So hopefully that sound will add to the ambiance of the interview. So our paths crossed sort of from the Stanford connection. You were right out of school, you had dropped out, and I had just entered it. But I think your early life before that is, so fascinating, and in so many ways is parallel to what you're doing today. So I would love to start there. As a young child, your father, Bill Browder, was one of Putin's, biggest enemies, and you were living with that threat over you in the UK. So could you speak to that story? What had happened, and what was your childhood like in that context?
Yeah, so I witnessed firsthand my father's transition from a kind of boring hedge fund manager, finance guy, to a human rights activist, exposing and sanctioning basically the Russian mafia. Um, and I saw it firsthand growing up, and I kind of um, saw the journey of all of these very nasty people going after him. His lawyer was murdered, and he devoted his life to getting justice for his lawyer. And it taught me really two valuable life lessons, which I use to this day. The first is, I think, even before what happened to him, and definitely after, a dislike for authority. I think that the world is a terrible place, and in some areas, it's a great place. But in some areas, it's a terrible place. And if something is wrong, it's really good to fight back against it. And then the second thing that he taught me is to be fearless. When I started my company, DoNotPay, there are a lot of like mid-level, nasty bureaucrats, parking ticket bureaucrats, lawyers after me. But nothing compares to having the Russian mafia after your family. And so it put everything in perspective and made me realize that everything bad that happens is just water under the bridge. And it's really good to be sort of fearless in life.
Definitely. It's kind of amazing context to have as a founder when you are going to be, putting out fires every day. And some of them will feel really big, and some of them will feel small. But I guess compared to that, they're all minimal. But I guess so, after high school, you attended Stanford. And at that point, like when you got into Stanford and you're moving to California, did you feel this need like to go fight corruption or, do some heroic thing? Or what were you thinking of doing at that point in your life?
The law was always my passion. I had worked for lots of human rights organizations. I built their apps for some of the biggest ones, like Freedom House, which is the oldest human rights organization in America. I built their iPhone app. And so I was always passionate about the law. And then I moved to Stanford and had all these problems with my driving. And that's really how my company got started.
Okay, so we're gonna get into that, but I have one quick question before that is, as you're going to Stanford, it's sort of like California, the land of innovation. There's all these technologists that dropped out and have, started some of the biggest tech companies in the world. Like, how was your experience actually being there, moving across the world and doing it?
It was a dream come true. So I grew up in a suburb of North London with my mother, and it was very cold, very rainy. And I taught myself to program when I was 12 using Stanford YouTube videos on iOS
Wow.
devices. And this was like before the days of like Codecademy and all of these great platforms. They really just had these videos as a way to learn. And I thought, if this is what the videos are like, one can only imagine what it's actually like when you get there. And this, when you land, it's just the most magical place ever.
Totally. Palm Drive is pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
And then, so during your time at Stanford, I want to ask you about the DoNotPay Inception, but you actually dropped out because of you joined the Thiel Fellowship.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I guess, how did that come about?
So I was 3.5 years in. I had about 6 credits to go. And I basically come up with a system of getting through every class. The only classes that I couldn't get through were the ones that made you attend every day. And there's
Mm,
this one requirement, which I'm sure you know, creative expression, which
yes.
literally requires you to go every day and do dance. Uh,
100%. And they're actually the most time consuming classes. They're like 3 or 4 times a week. I did
yeah, and
improv.
it's one unit. And I was like, I can't do this. I'm too busy with my business. And so I had really made it my mission to graduate. I took Do Not Pay very slowly in college, which I can kind of
Mm.
go through, but um, it got to the point where I was so busy with my company that I didn't have time to do dancing every day at 8:30 a.m.
Yeah, makes sense. And Peter Thiel started the program to like inspire people to not necessarily take a super traditional path and, go out and build, and like for extraordinary young people. Did you get to like interface one-on-one with Peter?
Yeah, I did. I was lucky through Founders Fund and also the Thiel Fellowship. I had dinner with him a few times. He's very smart. I think all of these sort of luminaries really live up to their
Yeah.
expectation, at least in tech. In other industries, they just got lucky.
Was there any like big takeaway or piece of advice or thing about, him that he had sort of input on you guys that kind of sticks with you today?
I think that out of all of the investors, Founders Fund is the most kind of risk averse and conservative from a risk standpoint. I mean, so a lot of other funds, they encourage you to do excess spending and all of this stuff. But Do Not Pay is an incredibly frugal company. We're a very lean team. We're only 15 people, despite over 3 million people visiting our website every month. And we're profitable. And so I think just his like focus on being frugal and being very conservative with like raising money and things like that is a lesson that I still practice every day.
Yeah, I feel like he has lived through enough like tech cycles to understand that, and I think you guys are clearly in a really good position. We're gonna get into that, so let's dive into Do Not Pay. What is the inception story? You're a student at Stanford, and you're a year or two in, or you just got there. What inspires you to go ahead and like start a company?
Yeah, so I was kind of in the summer between high school and college, just like driving around in London. And then I became a student at Stanford. And I'm not going to use this as an excuse, but everyone in America drives on the other side of the road. But admittedly, I was a terrible driver. And I probably got about 30 parking tickets between the ages of 18 and 20. And I was just a college student, and these tickets are really expensive. They're like $100 to $200 a piece. Um, and so I had to become an expert to save money and get out of the tickets without paying them. And I researched all of these parking laws, and I realized that if you know the right things to say, it's a good life lesson. You can save a lot of money. And so there were all these loopholes, like if the tree was covering a sign, or if
Mm,
they made a mistake on the ticket and they said the car was blue instead of black. And so I began to have a lot of success with my own tickets. And I began to have this reputation, almost like this Better Call Saul type of reputation among my friends as the guy who can get people out of their tickets. And it wasn't long before I was getting all these random Facebook Messenger requests from people I barely knew asking for help. And I try and be helpful and nice. And so I was at one point like spending 5 hours on Microsoft Word helping 4 different people copying and pasting their parking ticket letters. And I thought, as a software engineer, I had all of this experience like building these apps and websites for human rights and legal organizations. Why is there no service that gets you out of your parking tickets automatically? And so I created the first version of Do Not Pay really just as a fun side project to impress a few friends. But one of my friends was like you. She was like very into media, and she was a blogger at the Huffington Post. And she got out of her parking ticket and she wrote about Do Not Pay. And usually her posts like get maybe a few thousand views, but her particular one on Do Not Pay went absolutely worldwide viral.
wow.
And we started from about like 20 cases in the first week, my friends, to 50,000 cases in the second week, because it was on front page of Reddit, like CBS News, Daily Mail in the UK. And this really taught me of the like value of like hitting the zeitgeist. It turns out everyone hates the government and these large corporations. everyone feels like David in David versus Goliath. And so if I was to build a product to not only just help with parking tickets, but also help with other areas of the law, it could be a really big outcome. And so that's kind of what I focused my college time on, raising money from investors and building DoNotPay to where it is today.
Yeah, and eventually you couldn't keep doing the dance classes. It makes sense.
Yeah.
But wow, so when you first had that initial like crazy unexpected viral growth and like natural viral growth, was your website able to handle that? Because like I've spoken to people in the past where it's like
Yeah.
it's you have to put so much like infrastructure behind that, and it's sometimes can actually be bad when you get such a natural uptake unexpected.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. It completely crashed. It was really a shame. Maybe it'd be like 10 times as big if it was working in those initial times. It was very janky. I created the first version myself. Like the database broke, everything broke. And so that's at that point I realized maybe I should start getting the VCs involved to like start building a team around it.
So then when you dropped out, you went full time on DoNotPay and you were living in Palo Alto and you started like putting your team together. What were those early days? Like what was your focus?
So I hired a team, like lots of my Stanford buddies, and we rented out the house where Facebook was started in Palo Alto for the summer. And
Wow. Why? For the vibe or what were
well,
you
the
thinking?
vibe was definitely a benefit, but really it was just a great cheap house. The landlord was like in his 80s, and he didn't really use Zillow, so he just thought, I'll get X amount. That seems fair, and it was like half the market rate. And it was only actually after we signed the lease did we realize it was the famous house, not the house from the Social Network movie. It was actually the real house, and there were all
Wow.
these relics. And it was we began to build DoNotPay into what it is today, and we went from one use case, parking tickets, to over 250 use cases today, which include things like suing robocallers, getting compensation from crypto companies, freezing deposits, landlord-tenant disputes, getting refunds from United.
I definitely want to ask you, let's do it now, about Celsius. You guys have been helping. You've been like all over the news because you found kind of a loophole, as you're so good at doing, to help kind of, customers of Celsius sue them. What's the loophole that you found, and like how is that going? How many people have done it? What's the success looking like today? Like
I should mention, so Celsius has now declared bankruptcy. So the reason it was important for us to move quickly is when a company declares bankruptcy, you can't sue them anymore. But
wow.
when we did it, so in Celsius's terms of service, it says that you can't sue them in federal court. You can't do a class action against them. But under Section 20C, it says you can sue them in small claims court. And we are world experts at doing that. We've taken down corporations like Equifax and Comcast in small claims court. And so we thought this is a great product to help people, the retail investors who maybe have $10,000 who stuck in there, sue Celsius. What all of these companies, there's different types of bankruptcy filings. There's you can file as a broker, like if you're like a Robinhood type company, or you can file as a regular company, which is called Chapter 13 bankruptcy. And the worst thing about all of these crypto exchanges filing bankruptcy is they're saying, we're not brokers, we're just regular companies. And if you file as a regular company, all of the user deposits actually go to the end of the line. But if you were to file as like a Robinhood-like broker company, the user deposits would be the front of the line. And it's really cynical how these companies are destroying their users with these legal tactics to hurt them.
Do you think people will get their money back?
I think that some of the money is still there, assuming crypto doesn't crash more. Celsius, I think there's a kind of 2 billion hole or something like that. But it's going to be a big loss for a lot of people. And that's why the legal system is so important, because people have their rights trampled on all the time. And it's really important that they fight back and stand up for themselves.
The current legal practices all over the world, and specifically in America today, like I saw something on Twitter that it was like second-year lawyers were making like $1,200 an hour. So basically it's really unaffordable for most people. How are you thinking about like how we can kind of fix the sort of huge gaps in legal practice today?
So the lawyers are very protectionist. It's perhaps one of the most protectionist industries The legal industry in the US makes over $400 billion a year. And so there's a lot of money at stake to
Wow.
protect. And so the way they keep the prices high is they say you need to have a license, you need to have this license, that license, this specialty, that specialty. And if a consumer wants to sue, so these companies, their business model is concentrated benefit but diffuse harm. So what I mean by that is Comcast know that they can charge 20 million Americans a $10 late fee, and that makes them $200 million in revenue, because those 20 million Americans can't fight back over $10 because it's too expensive. It costs $1,200 to even hire the lawyer.
And most people, I feel like they're also sort of capitalizing on the fact that, like, you know, you as a young person were like, I'm going to fight against every single parking ticket. But a lot of people, even if they can't afford it, just don't even really understand that there is that loophole, don't have the time. And, you know, it's not their priority. They're too lazy. So it's like companies can honestly just sort of capitalize on people's like laziness or lack of time to fight these things.
Exactly. And so this comes into the solution, which is like software. So my view is the legal system is so broken, we can't like be a law firm or make lawyers better. The only way to win is to empower consumers to represent themselves using software. And that's DoNotPay's like legal cover, where we're not practicing law, we're not violating all of these protectionist laws. The user is representing themselves with software. So I can imagine a world one day where maybe a user has AirPods in the courtroom and the software is whispering in their ears what to say.
Wow, that's so interesting. If you look at like, you know, the future of lawyers and robot lawyers, not just in the next 50 years, but like in 100 or 150 years, what issues do you think will never be able to be sort of autonomized? Are there some that you think are just too complex? You'll always need that human touch?
Yeah, so when with DoNotPay, I tried a lot of different things, some of which failed. I tried to do divorce and I tried to do immigration cases, and both of those didn't succeed until I ultimately decided to just stay in my lane and do consumer rights. And the reason those more complicated areas will never succeed fully automated is too emotional. You have to go to court and people are crying and all of this stuff. And you can't just have a document, and AI can't just write that. So more emotional areas will always have a human touch.
Definitely. Okay, so you've dealt with, we got to lawyers, but you've also dealt with like American bureaucracy and how to get around it. You have sort of a unique view into American bureaucracy today. Like what is the most disturbing parts? What do you think makes sense?
So I think the most disturbing part is the amount of human interaction you need to get things done. So in a lot of jurisdictions, you needed to show up, you need to get a special stamp to do this or that. The good news in that regard is that COVID has moved the legal system forward by 10 years. So in the past, you had to show up for everything, but at least now some jurisdictions say you can do e-filing, you can represent yourself online and things like that. And that's very positive. Another positive area is that the US mailing system is almost like the API for the government. So there's an API, it's called Lob API, which allows you to just send mail. Software can communicate and send mail to it. And most things can be done with US mail. So that's the trick where you can get over a lot of these bureaucratic hurdles using the universal API of mail.
Very interesting. So, okay, going back to DoNotPay's products today, you recently tweeted that you guys were working on a product to help combat institutional racism. Can you give us any hint on that?
Yeah, so in a lot of deeds, like if you own a house, there's a deed, and also homeowners associations, which we hate with some other products we're working on. There are these racist restrictions, and they're literally racist. They say of people of a certain race can't live here unless they're the help. It literally says that. In 1958, the Supreme Court said, obviously this is illegal, it's against the Constitution and can't be enforced. But no one actually bothered to change these millions of documents. So you go to like all these deeds in California and it still says this. And if you're a homeowner or potential homeowner and you see this, it's really like a remnant of the racist past in this country. And so on July 1st, California passed a new law that says that anyone, any concerned citizen or any title company or anyone can file a document to strip these racist deeds of their racist language. And so DoNotPay comes in as the bureaucracy fighting company, and we found a way to automate it. So we're going to help consumers clear all of this racist past from all these documents. And also, we are thinking of, if you sign up for DoNotPay, just as a nice touch, we'll clear 20 deeds. Just like for every user who signs up, we'll remove 20 racist deeds from the market. And it's not it doesn't have a practical impact, but it has a psychological impact that all of this still exists.
Definitely. That's such a horrible and disheartening experience, I can imagine, for someone to be looking at buying a piece of property and come across that. So I think that's an amazing product that you're launching. What has been I think the past 2 years have been kind of a crazy time for founders because COVID hit and a lot of people prepared for the worst. And then, a few months later, it turned out tech had its biggest boom yet. And then now we're actually sort of coming around to kind of bigger economic downturn, and tech is starting to feel that pain. How have you thought about adapting and shifting to market conditions throughout this kind of roller coaster and looking forward to the next few quarters?
So I think this goes back to when I was at Stanford. So one thing I left out about my story is I raised $1 million from A16Z as the pre-seed when I was at Stanford, but I made a kind of deal with them where I could actually stay in school for as long as I wanted. And so unlike a lot of other startup founders who are like, grow, 3 months, demo day or whatever, I wanted to make DoNotPay successful, and I could take it slowly to come up with the right strategy to do that. And the biggest question that I asked myself was, why hasn't this idea succeeded in the past? It seems obvious that an app like DoNotPay should exist. There are apps to do everything. Why isn't there the robot lawyer that fights for your consumer rights? And the reason it didn't exist is because there was a graveyard of companies trying the same idea as us. There was a company called Fixed, which helped people appeal parking tickets. There was a company called Service, which helped people with delayed flights. But the problem with all of these companies is they only focused on one or two things. And unless you're a bad driver like me, the average American only gets a parking ticket once a year. And so it's very difficult to build a retentive business around that. So I knew if I wanted to make DoNotPay successful, I had to go horizontal and become a platform for solving legal issues. And that's why I decided to do this crazy thing of 250 areas. And that has allowed us to be a subscription business, which is a lot stronger than these other companies that have failed in the past. And in general, whenever there's tough economic times, I hate to say it, but DoNotPay is an ETF in the world's problems. And so the more problems that there are, unfortunately. And so when at the beginning of COVID, we saw our usage go crazy because Expedia was canceling everyone's hotels and people needed refunds. And similarly to today, people are more focused on saving money. So they're canceling subscriptions.
Exactly.
More.
People have a greater incentive to, to save money wherever they can. As you look forward to the future of DoNotPay, what is your sort of, dream vision for what it could ultimately become?
So as of right now, around 2.5 to 3 million people use DoNotPay.com. We have free services, and we also have a subscription, which high six figures subscribe to. My goal with DoNotPay is to make it top 20 most popular website in America. And I think everyone could use its help. We have very rich investors who use DoNotPay because they hate their Planet Fitness or Equinox memberships. And we have homeless people who use DoNotPay because they sleep in their cars and unfortunately get parking tickets. So I think it's a universal need. And so I think I'm biased, but hopefully everyone in America can enjoy DoNotPay one day.
It's funny because I actually want to get out of my Equinox membership now. So could I use DoNotPay to do that? It would help because it says I have to move to California again.
I'll set you up. We have a special VIP move documentation service because the VCs love the Equinox cancellation.
So. And then I'm just curious because I think during COVID, when a lot of people at the beginning, especially, were struggling and, they couldn't cancel their gym membership, or like, I remember, a lot of even like restaurant members clubs made you not cancel. So you're basically getting no service, but you're still paying a monthly fee and you're kind of locked into it. I totally see how that's very unfair for the consumer. But as you were helping people get out of this, did you ever hear from, like one of those gyms or one of those restaurants or whoever it was being like, this is our only way to stay in business?
So we've definitely had these challenges. We have one product, we call it the reservation credit card. And what it is it's a special burner credit card that you can use for restaurant and hotel reservations. And if you don't show up, it can't be charged because we block it. And we had one restaurant, it was like a Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco, send us a cease and desist letter. And I think that you have to pick your side, and no one can fault us for being very pro-consumer. I think these businesses ultimately do make a lot of money. Of course, some struggle, but we're the general counsel for the consumer, and they're welcome to hire their own lawyers to fight back against us, although we don't pay much attention to that anyway.
You do a lot of your own angel investing, and
Yes.
you can see it on your Twitter. You have, sort of a network of people that you support both with capital, but it also seems with, your time and experience and connections. What's your approach to kind of angel investing? How do you think about it?
So, as you mentioned, I took the Thiel Fellowship, and I became a Thiel Fellow, and I actually there's a group of fellows who interview the next set of fellows as well. So we see the ones that get in, and we also see the ones that don't get in. And I meet a lot of young founders in my network, and they've started asking me for advice because they're a few years earlier than I was. And initially, I was helping them as friends for free until I realized this is a great business model where I can invest in them very early, help them package their deal to the big VC firms. And then the big VC firms come in at like 10 to 50 times the price that I'm paying, and I hand it off to them and move on to the next one. And I would be remiss to say, Riverside is actually one of those examples where the founder of Riverside, which is the platform we're using to record this, actually interned or was going to intern for DoNotPay, and he talked about starting Riverside, and I was like, I got to invest. And so companies like that with really young, talented founders, I like to be a part of.
Okay, well, I just have to say a big congrats to him, because I was using Zoom for my first few episodes of this podcast, and the audio and video quality was horrible. And then I did a sort of coffee with a different podcaster, and he was like, you have to use Riverside, and it has actually changed everything. It's an amazing, amazing business. So good for you and good for him. Yeah, someone's biggest advice for me was whenever you can, basically invest in your friends at Stanford. Okay, so we're veering towards the end of the interview today. I'm very curious to hear if you have any thoughts about sort of the current conflict in Russia, just because of your sort of family's experience with Putin. Do you have any thoughts about, where this war is going to go?
I'm not a geopolitical expert, but according to some of the conversations we have in the family, we think it will get a lot worse. It's good that Ukraine is winning slightly, because my dad thinks that other countries in the Baltics will be next. This isn't about NATO or Russian nationalism. According to him, it's just about creating a distraction, because most of the money in Russia has been stolen. And so because it's needed to be a distraction, it's not going to stop at Ukraine.
Interesting. Oh, that's a very interesting perspective that I have not heard yet. Do you think Putin is a sociopath?
Oh, or just definitely. Yeah. I think most people would say that.
Yeah. Agreed. But I talked to someone that I guess he used to work in defense, and they had done a lot of psychological studies, and they were saying he's actually very sane, but hard to imagine how. I guess there's a lot of shit going on in the world today that's not great. But what are the things that make you optimistic for tomorrow and make you believe that, the future will be better than today? Why are you optimistic?
Um, I think that the world is continuously getting better. There's a lot of noise in the news about the medium term problems, but I'm a technologist, and even outside of DoNotPay, on the investing side, I'm seeing companies do like vertical farming so that hopefully there'll be enough food for everyone in the world. There's like fusion companies working on unlimited energy. Imagine what you could do with unlimited energy.
Yeah. I
And
think that
it's,
Google
yeah,
and Chevron just invested in one of those.
yeah, and so I think it's the best time ever to be alive. And I think, aside from what's going on today, in 10 years' time, we'll look back and say, how did we live with all these problems? Why didn't we just invent these great technologies sooner?
I totally agree. I totally agree. I actually, one follow-up question that I always have this debate with my brother. Like, when, say, 50 years from now, when we're looking back on society today, do you have any thoughts about like what will be the thing that we're most sort of like shocked about that we did? Because some people say like, cultured meat, where you can grow meat in a petri dish, for example, like maybe the fact that we ate animals will be like a crazy thought, or these things that will sort of like basically optimize out of. Do you have any thoughts about what those might be?
Yeah, I think you stole my go-to answer, which
Mm.
is it's probably going to be illegal to eat animals. I also think that people will look back on this time and say, why were all these coins, crypto coins, worth trillions and billions? But that's too controversial, so I'll stop there.
No, I actually, one question about that, because like I feel like you kind of are like not anti-government, but anti sort of like huge institutions. And so in that way, I would think like you would be very bullish on crypto because it is like decentralized and people are supposed to have full autonomy.
I really support the ideology. I think that 99% of crypto companies and projects are actually scams with no real world value. Celsius is a great example. It's not decentralized. And I think a lot of these things, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Consumers love crypto because they were getting 25% interest on their money, with supposedly no risk. But they realized that there is actually a lot of risk there. And if it seems too good to be true, it is. And a lot of people got scammed, unfortunately.
Definitely. Yeah, it is. I also think it's like so new that it's going to go through kind of all these like trials and tribulations and cycles, and then hopefully eventually. It's weird because it's almost like to make it a really sort of stable industry, there would almost have to be like a few winners that become like very respected. Interesting stuff. Well, it has been a great pleasure to talk to you. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. I am so excited and interested with what you guys are doing. And I think it's so cool. Like you guys are always sort of expanding and launching. And I think you're just such a dynamic company. So I personally like really enjoy following your progress, and I'm very much rooting for you guys.
Thank you.